আমরা এখন লাইভে আছি।
Okay. Good afternoon everyone. আপনাদের সবাইকে অনেক অনেক শুভেচ্ছা জানিয়ে স্টার্ট করছি আমাদের আজকের ওয়েবিনার. Today's webinar is the second of this series that we are doing in this month on gender-based violence. আমরা গত সপ্তাহে আরেকটা ওয়েবিনার করেছিলাম, the first one for this series. It was about gender, the representation, media representation of gender. আজকে আমরা কথা বলবো masculinity নিয়ে. So আপনাদের সবাইকে অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ আমাদের সাথে আজকে জয়েন করার জন্য। আমি ফারহানা, আমি কাজ করছি as the Assistant Director for the Center for Gender and SRHR, James Brigant School of Public Health, BRAC University. Ajke, I'm very excited about the panel I have today, and I say that for every webinar, and trust me, I don't say it for the sake of it. I always have really good speakers in our webinars. So I would like to introduce them first, and then we'll go for some ground rules for this webinar. So for today's webinar, we have with us Anand Pawar. Anand is the Executive Director of SAMYAK. SAMYAK is a resource center on gender and masculinities, and it's in Pune, India. We have my very dear colleague, Farzana Misha. Misha is working as the research coordinator at the BRAC James Brigant School of Public Health, BRAC University. She's coordinating nationwide research on male youth and their sexual and reproductive health and rights. We have Imtiaz, Pavel, Neel. Imtiaz is a gender and diversity justice analyst and a filmmaker. Imtiaz is also the founder of Mirror Institute for Art and Justice, which institute works on bringing social change through various ways of art and various ways of artwork. Sorry, I'm just like, Imtiaz, you can say a little bit more of your institute when you talk. So we have these three panelists. We will talk about masculinity. I know that when we talk about masculinity, especially, it's not a very popular thing when we talk about masculinity in the context of gender-based violence. So that's the main focus of the discussion for today's webinar. We will see, we will know about why it's important to talk about masculinity when we talk about gender-based violence, and how the concept of masculinity can be different in different cultures, and how it is linked to gender-based violence. So each of our panelists, they will talk for 10 minutes, and then after 3 of them, we'll go for the question answer session. Due to our limited time, we won't be able to take the questions directly from the audience, but we would like to request you to put your questions in the chat box of webinar, or you can also post your questions in the comment box because we are live on Facebook. So that was the introduction part. I think we can go for the discussion now. So we will start with Anand Pawar. Hi, Anand. I can't see you. Hello.
Hello. Hello. Hello. Good evening,
Hi.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for joining us and, you know, making time for this webinar. Anand has been working on these issues, like especially on masculinity, for a long time now, and I know he has been working closely with different organizations in Bangladesh. So welcome, Anand, for this webinar today. So I think because, as I said, that we will be talking about masculinity today in the context of gender-based violence. So I would like to start with, if you just like tell a little bit about like why it's important, because when any kind of gender-based violence, violence against women, harassment, rape, anything, we tend to talk about the social security, we tend to talk about the victim blaming is a big thing and how to stop it. But why do you think, or we think, that talking about masculinity is really important for this gender-based violence issue? So you can start.
Thank you, friends in BRAC and friends in Bangladesh and all the people who are attending the webinar. It's always a pleasure to talk to friends in Bangladesh. And thank you for having me here. Before I really go on masculinities and gender-based violence, I would certainly draw the link between gender, culture, time, masculinities, some of these concepts, and then maybe we could talk about gender-based violence. So as it is correctly conceptualized, masculinity is not a standalone kind of idea. It is very much part of the gender discourse. Rather, I would say it is very much part of the patriarchal system. The ways masculinities are being created, restructured, recreated are very much part of, because it is one of the manifestations of the patriarchal expressions in given societies and cultures. Like we talk about gender, which is a social and cultural construct in given societies and cultures. Gender is, we basically, gender power relations are sustained through the ideas of masculinities and feminities, and that is why it is important to talk about how the gendered idea creates the notions of manhood and notions of womanhood, or notions of masculinities and notions of feminities. My second submission would be to say that since 2 decades now in South Asia, there has been this very active discourse on masculinities, and it really evolved through the contribution of various individuals, organizations, researchers, filmmakers, and so on, and programmers, etc. And our learning so far is that we need to really, quite a kind of complex understanding of masculinity as it started emerging, started realizing that working with men and boys is different than working on masculinities. And that is why we need to really understand masculinities and not working with men and boys. Because most of the programming in last decade really happened working with men and boys, and people said that we are working on masculinities. So that basically took away the very complex relationship of notions of masculinities with the systems of patriarchy, with the systems of patriarchy and other institutions of discrimination. So yeah, I mean, and as we say that, these ideas of manhood are really differently constructed and reconstructed and reinforced in different societies and cultures. For instance, if we talk about men and masculinities in India, the homogenizing the category itself is a problem. For instance, we as men in Bangladesh are not all equal and all similar, socially and culturally. We are not a homogeneous and monolithic group. It is further divided into different social status, different cultural practices, class. Though Bangladesh friends say that they don't follow caste, but there are the subtle expressions of caste. So what I feel is that as men, and as the idea of masculinity cannot be a homogeneous idea or homogenized idea, we need to really see the intersect of masculinities and its connection with violence, with other systems of discriminations like caste, class, race, location, employment, unemployment, poverty, and etc. And I guess, like other systems of discrimination create violence, the system of masculinity, the dominant idea of manhood, which is always linked with risk, performance, and violence becomes an inevitable part of our understanding of kind of the dominant idea of masculinity in given societies and culture. And it could be very different in different regions. So the dominant masculinities, in the idea of dominant masculinity, even in Bangladesh, is going to be very different in different cultures. For instance, if the idea of real man in Dhaka, if we try and consider, this is coming from one of the trainings that I did in Dhaka, and participants said that even in Dhaka, culturally, we can see the different ideas of manhood in areas like Gulshan and and non-Gulshan areas. So which is completely based on the kind of class system, right? So in different caste and class, it is going to be different, right? Even within Bangladesh, people were saying that the most dominant idea of manhood is coming from the northern Bangladesh, which has got connections and education from foreign countries. You know, so that a little wealthier kind of part. Participants shared about the way men experience the idea of manhood in migrant men in Dhaka is completely different than in Chittagong, or now in Cox's Bazar with Rohingyas, and you know the relationship of manhood is really completely must have really changed. So masculinity cannot be a static idea. It is different in different cultures and different societies, and even in different times, and that is something very, very important. In Bangladesh context, if I say time and how time must have impacted, for instance, pre-1971, the idea of manhood must have been very different than post-1971 ideas. And then as Bangladesh got into this development paradigm and modernizing paradigm, the idea of manhood must have been very different. You know, I'm not very sure how much of it is documented, but I'm pretty sure scholars in Bangladesh must have really documented, studied on that. And I'm pretty sure, like in South Asia during 90s and during the process of globalization and post-globalization new liberal market, the idea of manhood is now quite linked with particular class, market, and brand. So over the period, the ideas of masculinities must have changed, and it is always intersecting with other ideas of other systems of power and inequalities. Those create violence, and masculinity, the dominant idea of masculinity in itself is quite been expressed, especially in South Asia, in most of the parts of the world, but in South Asia especially, where we celebrate a lot many wars, be it a freedom war or be it a kind of war. Our ideas of manhood and masculinities are highly informed by the cultures of violence, and cultures of violence is celebrating wars and in a very violent ways, or say domestic violence, or say racial violence, or say the contexts are different in South Asia. Of course in Sri Lanka it is more of race, in India it is more of caste, and now religion. So the contexts are different, but in variety of ways we are celebrating violence in a way which is shaping the idea of manhood in many ways in given societies and in given cultures. And I see gender, for instance, you know, for Bangladesh or India, I saw in Dhaka, I saw there was this match against, there was this cricket series in India and Bangladesh. The way Bangladesh India cricket match will be advertised as a war, the way India-Pakistan matches are colored here. So that is what I say, that, you know, it is, let's say there is a war between India and Pakistan. So we really celebrate a lot of war. And now if we are living in the culture of violence, it is but obvious that gender-based violence is normalized, and which is linked with the idea of dominance and power and expression of that power and control, patriarchal control, and on all those who are powerless. So it might not be just women, it could be children. So father beating his child is the idea of real man, or say that way non-hegemonic, non-dominant figure of man creating violence against transgender becomes a gender-based violence, or a feminine man being teased or bullied in the school or college campuses by so-called masculine men is also a gender-based violence. And it is the expression of power, it is the expression of violence, it is the expression of control, it is the expression of homogenizing the idea of masculinity. And if someone is not fitting into that frame, violence is being inflicted, violence has been used as a tool to express that power or to have control over that idea of masculinity. And that's how I see gender-based violence is not a standalone idea again. We need to really first see the larger connection between the idea of masculinity, the linkage with culture of violence, and gender-based violence as one of the aspects of culture of violence, which is normalized in our South Asian families and South Asian structures of families, and the way masculinities are created within the family systems, you know, and and taught to be having control over the subordinates or those who are powerlessness. And that is exactly the expression within domestic spheres or in public spheres, where a man use violence to normalize the idea of masculinity by using power, threat, violence, and gender-based violence is one of the expression of that broader connection between masculinities and violence. I stop here and I hand it over to Farhana.
Thank you, Anand. You just brought up some really important things. And I think it's very important what you said, that how like one specific form of masculinity kind of dominates other kind of masculinities. And that is also, you know, when we often talk about like gender-based violence, we kind of, we are not inclusive enough. You know, as you said, the effeminate men, the men who doesn't fit into the specific that in the society that normalize way of being masculine. So I think that is very important, and maybe not now, but I'll come back to you just to have a like small discussion on how you see it changing, you know, because in many ways when it comes to women rights, SRHR and everything, in many ways I feel like if you look at the history and everything, we're going backwards in many issues, for many issues. But how do you actually see the changing, how the definition of masculinity, how it's changing over time, and if it's like how's the impact on if we want to talk about gender-based violence? Because I know, you know, I was having this discussion, and it was said that, I think it was like Kamla Vasin who said that, you know, when a man is touching a woman on the road, it's more like the pleasure of power than sexual power. You know, he's not having an orgasm out of it. So that is very important to talk about when we talk about gender-based violence. But I'll come back to you, Anand, to discuss this. But for now, I want to go to Farzana Misha. As I mentioned at the beginning, but I would say that again, for those who just joined us, Misha is working as the research coordinator at the School of Public Health, BRAC University, and she's coordinating a research on male youth and SRHR in Bangladesh. It's a mixed method study, which is they're conducting it nationwide. And Misha will be sharing some of the findings from that research, which is linked to masculinity and relevant to our discussion today. Misha, over to you. You can start now.
Thank you, Farhana. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
So today, let me share the screen first. Can you guys see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So today, as Farhana mentioned, I will talk about, I'll discuss some preliminary findings from a nationwide study that we conducted targeting the male youth of Bangladesh. I'd like to mention that this is first of its kind, where we look into SRHR perception, knowledge, and practice of male youth in Bangladesh, and it's a mixed method study. So as we are discussing what is masculinity, so Anand already shared the definition and how the idea of masculinity is perceived, but despite it varying across regions, cultures, there are some common grounds, which is money, power, management skill, sexual pleasure, fertility that defines a man. So we were asking our respondents, like, what do you mean by man, being a man, or who is a real man? So I would like to share some findings from our call. So for example, the 16-year-old respondent said, like, being a man means being powerful. He can do many things. He should be able to force himself on his woman. And if he is energetic, he can do everything. So here you see it's mostly about power. Second respondent I would like to mention said, like, being a man is, we are not girls, jail, death penalty are made for us. If we don't do this, then why should we be a man? So it's mostly about risk-taking behavior or tendency. And the third one I would like to mention is that shows dominance over your partner or wife. So here he says, if a husband hits his wife should remain calm. She should behave herself always. By that, definitely he means behave the way he wants her to behave. So the wrong idea of masculinity or conception of masculinity, as Anand also mentioned, can manifest itself through antisocial behaviors like gender-based violence, domestic abuse, drug abuse, etc. So we also asked our respondents, like, what do you understand when it comes to gender-based violence? By gender-based violence, what do you understand? So one respondent says, like, he thinks that if his wife doesn't listen to him and he slaps her, that's fine. But if she slaps him back, and if it's in front of other people, then that's violence against him. So violence towards him. So, and then another one mentions that before women were victims of violence, but now men are also being victims as they are being beaten, and at times women, they behave very poorly. So that's the male youth's idea of gender-based violence. So now let me talk about the study, so that you have some good idea what I'm going to talk about. So it, as I mentioned, it targets 15 to 24-year-old male youth. We have information on demographic and socioeconomic condition, health-seeking behavior, perception, knowledge, and practice regarding SRHR. And the prime objective of the study is to generate evidence. As I mentioned, it's first of its kind in Bangladesh. We are using a nationally representative data set. So it's, for us, it's a huge thing. And so the main objective is to generate evidence on perception, knowledge, and practice regarding SRHR of this cohort, which is 15 to 24-year-old male youth, and also identify the gaps and challenges when it comes to interventions regarding SRHR. Given today's topic, I will only focus on the masculinity part of our study. So to capture masculinity, so we utilize this index called Gender Role Conflict and Stress Index. It's been used widely, and it's been used to measure the degree to which an individual is concerned about demonstrating his masculine characteristics. So what happens, like here, we asked the respondents about their level of agreement with first-person statements to reflect their conflict stress around achieving those masculine expectations. So I'd like to mention that we had to customize the scale because it depends on, like, it varies from context and cultures. So this scale has been used in South Africa, US, UK, but for Bangladesh, this is the first time we're doing it. So we had to customize it, and the process was rigorous, and we had to consult a number of gender experts. So finally, we came up with this 17-item index, where they had to say whether they disagree, partially agree, or strongly agree with those statements. So I'll just quickly go through those statements. So there are a few statements where it's around the concept of man being the provider. So it's the statements were like, I worry how others will evaluate my ability to provide for my family, or also him being able to earn and being responsible for others. Then there were some issues regarding male virility. For example, there were statements like, being able to function sexually is important to me as a man. I don't worry if a sexual partner says she's not satisfied with me. And also that he should be in control of such situation. Then there was some statement around emotional vulnerability. I'm sure we all heard, like, boys don't cry. So there are statements like, it would be difficult or embarrassing for me if someone saw me crying. And also statements like, I find it difficult to describe how I'm feeling. And finally, some statement regarding peer dominance. For example, showing affection or love to other men makes me feel uncomfortable. Being physically stronger than other men is important to me. and important to, and also it's more like boasting. For example, it's important to me to know that I can drink as much as or more alcohol than my peers or than others. So, so using this index, what we did first, we looked into the variation of this index, like how we calculated this index for location and age group. So here you can see in the y-axis you see masculinity score, and the x-axis you see age groups and locations. So we have city corporation, other urban areas, and rural areas. I'll just quickly go through this. On average, it shows that this is slightly positive relationship with age. So as you grow older, you are more likely to hold on to these perceptions. And also the trends are stronger in rural areas, even though there is a large variation in the rural areas. Then there is a heterogeneity across divisions. So if we look into this, what we see is similar to the previous slide. There's a positive relationship between age and the index. And we see, so sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. So with this index, the higher you score, the more likely, it's more likely that you want to exhibit these masculine traits. So so if someone scores very high, it means he strongly believes in those statements. And if low, if it's the opposite. So here we see that big cities like divisions with big cities like Dhaka and Chittagong, they score comparatively lower compared to the rural divisions, except Rangpur is an outlier where it scores lower. So now we go to the analysis. So here we did this regression where we tried to explain the GRCS scale for male youth in the context of Bangladesh. So here we looked into how this index, the correlation among this index, and how demographic information, like demographic characteristics like age, education, marital status, being the main earner of the household, wealth index, how they have some impact on this index, play a role in this index, or these ideas. And also we included a bunch of risk-taking behavior traits like taking drugs, having more than 2 sexual partners, betting, and the things that, and also another one that's exposure to outdoor sports. So what do we find? So first we see that older male are more prone to exhibit such perception and traits. So the idea is, the assumption here is, or the plausible explanation will be like when you're young, you are less confident and you hear things, but you're not sure if you believe in that. But as you grow older, you start believing those. In terms of education, mainstream education is negatively correlated with the GRCS scale, which means in the mainstream education, the more you get educated, the less you score when it comes to this scale. However, for Qawmi Madrasa, it shows a positive correlation, and also it's statistically significant. If you are married, you are more likely to score higher. And in terms of income and well-being, it shows that respondents from a poor economic background, they tend to score high. For the risk-taking behavior, for smoking and consumption of any drugs, it's positively associated with the index. So in a way, you can say that if you are smoking currently, or you have taken drug, mostly here we considered injectable drugs in the last 6 months, then you are most likely to score higher in this scale and index. And also betting. So this betting includes betting that can be about anything, sports or any other thing. That's positively correlated and with the score, GRS score. And also having multiple sexual partners, specifically more than 2 partners in last 3 months, is positively correlated. So all the results that I have presented, it's all of them. I have only presented the statistically significant ones. So as for outdoor sports, we have a positive result, but it's not statistically significant, so I didn't include it here. So it brings us to the last slide, the slide before the last slide. So it's policy implications. So we can see there's a strong correlation between perceived masculinity and risk-taking behavior. And also literature shows that these ideas, they are typically instilled when you're during the prepubescent age. So if we are to create some policies or some interventions, it will be wise to target those perceptions and that time of the youth, like the age group, like the prepubescent age group, and that's when you can have a greater impact, because if the ideas are solidified, then it's difficult to break through those ideas and do something different. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Back to you, Farhana.
Thanks a lot, Misha. It was like really, really interesting, the things you have presented, but some of it, I think we already, like, we know that about the crying thing, like boys are not allowed to cry, this and that. But I think there are some kind of like advocacy then towards that, like what men can do or cannot do in that discussion. But I think, yeah, it's very, I just have, like, before we move to the next panelist, I just had one question, that when you said having multiple sexual partner, that is correlated to exhibiting those traits,
yes,
masculinity.
believing in those. So if you have more than, if you believe in those, the more you believe in those statements, like strongly agree, the more likely you are to have, like, and vice versa. So it's a, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we will, like, if even like Anand or Imtiaz, if you have any question to Misha regarding the findings or anything, we'll come up to that later. Now I want to go to Imtiaz, Pavel, Neel. Just for the audience who just like joined with us, Imtiaz is a gender and diversity justice analyst and a filmmaker, and the founder of Mirror Institute for Art and Justice. And through this institute, he's working on social change through different forms of art. Imtiaz, hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, we
can everybody hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, we can. Thank you, Imtiaz. Thanks a lot for making time to join us today for this webinar. I think we already discussed some very important aspects of masculinity in the context of gender-based violence, what Anand said, and then Misha presented the evidence. I would like you to talk more about these issues that Anand mentioned. In the context of Bangladesh, how you see these things in the context of Bangladesh, how these things is related to gender-based violence discussion and should be discussed. And also the question I wanted to ask Anand, which I will, but I also want you to mention a little bit about how do you see the change. I think that's also very important. So yes, you can start.
Okay. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, I would like to sort of pay my greetings to everyone present here, not only from BRAC University, but my friend, longtime friend Anand, whom we have been working like nearly 2 decades now through Men Engage International, Forum to Engage Men, and also SANAM, South Asian Network for Addressing Men, and many more. And I can also, I'm very happy that I can see Mustaq Rajabhai here. I don't know whether he is hearing, but I feel really honored that he is sparing his time, because I have been knowing him for another 2 decades when I used to work in remote places in Sylhet. on sexual and reproductive health programming for social change. Anyway, so yeah, it was pleasant hearing to both Anand and Misha. But my like my focus has been for last at least a decade and more that I have been like tired of hearing the stop violence, stop sexual violences, stop physical violences, stop emotional violences, and banners, festoons, protests, newspaper writings, and then seeing about the not only the impunity against men in power, boys related to power, but also the facts and features that actually, as Farhana also have mentioned, that we in Bangladesh can see in cases that certain even reversal. Instead of going forward on certain issues, we can see in terms of toxic and violent masculinities and its manifestations. We have the evidences, very unfortunate and painful evidences that in many cases we see even more complex outcomes in recent days. So that's why also from being an analyst, an activist, and finally I am more into the social change programming, looking into social change programming around addressing violent and toxic masculinities. And in that area, we, as you will all agree with me, the way that we learn all these toxic and violent masculinities within our families, from our schools, from our neighbors, from the different aspects of the community, from the so-called social norms and customs, and emerging notions that surround us as we grow, and peers and elders. I want to mention, whenever I mention peers, I must also mention elders, because it's, I'll explain more that how this elders really affecting the issue of juvenile or young people's deviations in terms of their risk-taking and violent behavior. So not only towards men, but also to other vulnerable and marginalized entities in the country and beyond. So coming back to the need for social change, actually, we felt that all these learning processes, all these constructions processes are not as easy as the words that we often give out in our training or in our preaching sessions or in our leaflets or in our even some very educational type of often development oriented so-called promotional films and things, materials. So the material and even some campaigns actually they can make sometimes very little dent often, as we have noticed that in terms of this changing the pathways of or courses of this reinforcement and reproduction, continuous reproduction and continuous reinforcement of this toxic and violent masculinities, again within the families and elsewhere. And so that's why we actually try to look into where could we really be more indulged, where we could really look into. That's why beside, we are not negating, we are not denying the academic and other programming related processes that are there, that have been there in terms of critical social change in addition to behavioral change. But we are also looking into this idea of realm of art. Not when we say art, it is visual art, performing art, literary art, and other forms of complex art forms like film and other complex art forms that are emerging these days, along with philosophy and history. And basically, it's an interdisciplinary approach to look into this agenda of social change, because it is not easy. It is complex and very difficult for the typically organized and driven organization to have dance in this area. So they're actually coming back to our main discussion. I would like to add what just Anand said, that the way actually the young people, I talk about children, adolescent, and young adults, the way they actually perform and conform. When we talk about sexual and reproductive health behaviors, actions, so there are constant pressures that they face from this, from all this cultural as well as very much normalized and culturalized. We often call it culture of silence, culture of violence, many things, but it is actually more than that. It is a culture of normalizing violence in a way that violence is the way to become not only proper boys and proper men, but also proper girls and proper women. Because in these societies, in these emerging societies, as well as it was in past, it is always glorified that when you are tough, when you can adapt and apply violence, only then you can survive, and only then you are basically promoting justice. And actually this idea of active non-violence, or the idea of being caring, idea of being sensitive, idea of being really, I'll not use this word gentle, because that is really contested, but I'll come back to the word care and sensitivity, and also empathy. So these have been, as I have seen in my life, that these have been actually this has been seen as sort of like disempowering. This has been regarded as sort of like put aside. If we cannot put aside the caring features and sort of like non-violent features, as well as sensitive and empathetic features of being a boy or a young person or an adolescent, then basically we are going to end up in injustices for ourselves. We are going to basically bring about a total series of unfortune for the entire family, ultimately, consecutively for the society. So then basically I want to mention how cruel this idea. I mean, if we are basically in this journey of change, then this the fact that how the boys and men and this idea of masculinities associated with their growth is often overlooked and ununderstood. In one of my friends in an Asia Pacific platform, again 1.5 decades back, was presenting a very interesting literature and art-based assessment, where he was saying that like men and boys are the most ununderstood creatures. Even they are often ununderstood than the cattle that are inside their house, because they are always like ornamented with the expectations around them, and then all the features that are aligned with their upbringing, and all of these things actually creates not only this not only they are ununderstood. Our studies have seen, our long work, like over I think over 2 decades work with young people, we have seen they are not only ununderstood, they are sort of like non-existing entities in our everyday society. Not only in the society, but also within family. When they are young people, when they are adolescents, when they are really young, then the community, the elders, they tend to not see them. Or when they see them, they try to avoid them. They like, let alone the fact of engaging with them in a meaningful and really meaningful and workable way. So it is basically sort of avoiding them, facing some form of inner inhibitions that, oh, they are the troublemakers, they will not listen, they are the wrongdoers, and they are the miscreants, and they are the non-listeners, not like the older young people who used to be like this, to listen to elders, and in many cases they even did try to even, but the current days young people, the elders think that they are totally alienated, they are totally non-addressable, unaddressable. That as they are unaddressable, so better they remain ununderstood, further ununderstood, and unseen and untreated or unengaged. So with this reality, and then there comes this individual level of what is happening inside this adolescent and young people. And we have noticed that this enormous external pressures as well as internal pressures around, as we can also see with the talk of Anand and Misha's presentation, this vicious male ego. This vicious male ego and its presence and its killing features within, when they are not performing or conforming, and when they are performing alone or within peers or within the public or private spaces, that makes them extremely insecure and fearful. And that insecurity, that sense of insecurity and that sense of fear and phobia can often not only force them into really sad risk-taking behaviors around unsafe and irresponsible sexual acts, or violent relational behavior, but also their association with drugs and other features that are contrary to their meaningful growth and development. So they are actually, as I am coming back to this expectation issues, their internal expectations as to become whether they have been able to exhibit themselves as manly young people, or they have been able to properly show down or show off their features around, you know, the young people who are regarded as important within the groups, within the institutions, within the public spheres. And in this age of so-called ICT, age of information, especially, which I call it ICT and social media and artificial intelligence and all these platforms, including YouTube. So this is actually adding another sphere to our the problems that have been emerging. That's the sphere of these divides and disconnects. Not only divides and disconnects, many of you might say that it is, we have been talking about it, but the divide and disconnects that have been very fast changing its faces, along with all this media and informational progress within this extremely consumerized and corporated realities. And you know that this transactional, risk-taking, sexual, and other behaviors, which also is related to formation of gangs, and then the other things are also related to it. And all of these issues are basically complicated, making complicated lives of not only men and boys, but also the women and girls, because as we have also seen from Misha's presentation, that there's this new ideas of acting as like the pressures of performing as a provider as well as a protector, and this provider and protector pressures and expectation from outside and inside, even if they have not completed their education, completed their education or their skills around livelihood, and not entered the work realm. From the very early, they actually start facing this, and that actually brings them to this courses where they are basically and coupled by the peer pressures and peer technologies. I would say it is not only earlier it was just peer pressures, but now it is complex peer technologies and conventions and customs that are actually endangering their psychosocial presence within when they are with themselves, and then whenever they are relating. And that's why we have been seeing that the enormous pressure they face in their sexual and non-sexual sexual relationship building things, but also not only the sexual things, but also the skills around negotiations within their peers and beyond, and of course to greater social fears, social strata. And then I must mention one, I have come to my last bit of my presentation, whereby I am more compelled to this this realm of so-called religion and faith, and the way our society, not only in Bangladesh, in Greater South Asia and Global South. One, especially I would like to talk about Bangladesh. I want to take charge of Bangladesh. We are becoming more and more anti-knowledge or non-knowledge oriented. So we have been more oriented with this expectation and idea that we will be sort of spoon-fed, or we will be sort of like equipped automatically with necessary life skills and life's amenities. And there actually the problem is that even the religion or faith, whatever they belong to, wherever they belong to, they actually depend on the preaching. And this preaching, be it coming from the hujurs, be it coming from the wajis, the people who do the sermons, be it coming from the imam, be it coming from their grandfather, grandmother, father, mother, elder brother, elder sister. So all these preachings are actually sort of further complicating all these notions. They are all these complexities, notions of complexities, they are already in, and it is making it further complex. And often, as you can often see, the extreme manifestation like holy artisans and the missing adolescents in the name of you know, they don't take the name in the first place, but then later we find that their brain have been sort of captured with this notion of earning the Jannah, earning the heavens in the fastest possible ways. So these type of things are really crucial, and has been coupled up with all these things I mentioned. So that's why our social change analysis and programming has adapted this interdisciplinary and multidimensional ways to actually address. And I'll come back when it is necessary. Sorry if I have taken a little bit of more time than.
Yes, but it's okay. I think, you know, you mentioned some really good points. You took a little bit of more time. It was allocated, but I'll just go to, we don't have much time for question and answer, but Anand, I just want to go back to you for a very briefly, like we don't have much time, but one thing that I told you, you know, the changes is the definition of masculinities and how it's like, how it evolved. I know that's a very big discussion, but at the same time, if you can just like briefly just address few things about, you know, addressing masculinity, that we are talking a lot about it in the gender-based violence discourse, but how do you think that can be effective? Just talking about it, we are saying, as Imtiaz also mentioned, that okay, the new generation, the portrayal of masculinity, religion, and there are lots of intersectionalities, you know. So given all this, how do you think we can effectively kind of address the issue of masculinity in terms of addressing the gender-based violence topic? We cannot hear you, Anand. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you for the question. Over the last 2 decades, we have seen work with men and boys on various issues, including gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health rights, in a very traditional modes. But as our understanding started telling us that working with men and boys and on masculinities are distinctly different areas. More deliberations around how do we address masculinities started, especially in South Asia. And I would come up with one of the lines from Rahul Roy's book that says that there are sites of production of meaning of masculinity, and these sites are like huge. I mean, many in numbers. So there are such sites where meaning of this toxic masculinity is created. While we say that, we typically say that films create idea of say toxic masculinity. Then this new programming that is being advocated by some of us is that we possibly need to then work with the films and not just with men and boys. Working with men and boys to help them interpret the content is one aspect of that. But content creation, informing the content, and that's what possibly Imtiaz is also doing, creating content, it becomes important. So working on masculinity is not just working with men and boys, but working on various aspects where meanings are created. For instance, histories influence the meaning of masculinity. Films influence the meaning of masculinity. Literature influence meaning of masculinities. Poetries possibly influence meaning of masculinities. Colors and color manufacturing people, cloth manufacturing people are creating these meanings of masculinities. I would say market and whatnot, body sprays are creating meaning of masculinities. In India, flavors of condoms are started creating meaning of masculinities. What we feel is that while we work with men and boys and try sensitizing them, just don't beat, don't create violence is one way of doing that. But at the same time, we need to really talk to them and engage with them by various means, including ITC, training, etc., to create filter in their mind, to filter these messages of toxic masculinity, those are coming to them, and prepare them to basically reject those messaging, reject those meanings, and accept the meanings that Imtiaz was talking about: empathy, sensitivity. These could be possible ways of intervention. Now, ways of intervention could be group education, ITC, engaging in cultural ways, or there could be various ways. But what basically we say that the wound is very large, and we are putting the ointment on one part of that, on one part of that. So programming need to be really widened, and development sector need to really create resources to have such kind of non-traditional programmings. And I guess, yeah, that's my response.
Thank you, Anand. So we have got some good questions. So I would just, as I said, it's already 5, but we'll take some more time since we have these questions and we didn't really interact with audience that much. So I can see, Misha, there's one question for you. It says that nice presentation. Appreciate the index. However, most of them are talking about toxic masculinity. I would like to know if the research has any findings on positive masculinity. Can some of the factors be used in our development programs to promote positive masculinity? I think that's what, that is also related to what Anand just said, promoting the alternative than the what socially constructed portrayal of masculinity, and developing the other narratives. So do you have anything on positive masculinity?
I would like to say that, first of all, as I mentioned, we are currently analyzing the data. So I shared the some preliminary findings, but I would like to thank her, because this is something we can look into, of course, because so we can see whether certain traits of positive masculinity and how it translates into different kind of SRHR practices. So it's more of thank you for the suggestion. We can definitely look into it, and that would be very interesting. And if we can come up with something, interesting findings, so we will definitely share with you all. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Like when the analysis is done, we will be, of course, we'll be disseminating the findings in another event. Another question, I think it's for Anand. It says, given the reality, do you think about applying the applying of the intersectional lens to address the toxic masculinity?
I thank you for the question. Very interesting. I think yes, intersectionality is the approach where you apply it. Your strategies might be different in different settings, isn't it? So one fit all doesn't really work. And most of the time, training modules address one type of issues, not really bringing in intersectionalities. So intersectionality is going to be very important. For instance, if in India, if you understand the category of Dalit, and I'm working with Dalit men, while I am talking about discrimination against women and violence against women, I need to bring in the issues of how masculinities, upper caste masculinities, are also creating discrimination and violence against them. And how caste, masculinity, gender is working together. I think that is going to be our perspective. Our content needs to be informed with that, and that is why content creation can be from the intersectionality perspective. And as I said, delivering programs could be very different. Now, there was this example where this huge one of the group in training. In fact, in Bangladesh also it happened. They drew this dominant man's picture on the paper, and they described him like six pack and some kind of branded goggle and some kind of branded shirt, and they created this Gulshan masculinity kind of picture. And my question to them was, what if he has an erectile dysfunction? And then everybody started laughing. So how do I just address the market and masculinity without addressing sexuality and sexual performance? And because virility is coming as one of the areas in the study. So it is not just going to be addressing virility, but it possibly, to translate that into the direct action point would be addressing how internet access and pornography access is recreating meaning of male virility. I might not really direct talk about virility and link with masculinity. So, delivery strategies could be very different, but intersectionality is the perspective that we cannot do away while we do programming around masculinity. And I could give many other examples, but I guess these two examples to just narrate what I want to say.
Yes, I think these are like really interesting, at the same time very effective examples. Anand, that what you gave out, like comments appreciating all the panelists. One audience said, such great point that working on men and boys is not same as working on the issues of masculinity. I think that's something we really need to understand, because we often think these things are the same. Another question is quite interesting. It says that during the COVID-19 shutdown, you have seen a rise in domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Is the pressure of being a protector and provider felt by male people somehow responsible for that to some extent? So who wants to say something about this question? It's open floor.
May I request Imtiaz?
Yeah,
Yes,
I will. So basically, as this interdisciplinary work is automatically leading us towards the path of psychosocial arena, and we were very much already working on this potential suicide as well as homicide. Often we don't know this suicide and these homicides, how they actually they happen, and on what ground, and because of our this not only the culture of impunities, but also this the complexities in this the way justice actually is accessed or justice process sort of take place. So as in this COVID situation, again it actually relates to this issue of non-understanding. So these men and boys, so they are not only ununderstood by the others, in the society, but also their family members, their relation within their relationship. They are often less understood, or they are treated as if they don't need to be understood, or rather the further expectations or the pressures that are very rigid in nature sort of are thrown towards them. So in this situation, I have been also consulting and also being sort of mindful of our social legal colleagues and also legal expert colleagues. They are really struggling with the situation whereby police is in most of the cases they are busy, so-called busy in other engagements, on the streets and other places. So they are saying that this type of domestic violence or domestic complaints we are not ready to take, which is really appalling, and that actually that makes me really fearful that what will happen now when this artificially installed rival forces, when they are not basically interacted, they have not learned how to interact and how to engage within the relationship, because these masculinities, I'm sure you all agree that these masculinities is not about just men and boys, or it is also this masculinities, the new masculinities, that emerging masculinities, this toxic and violent masculinities are often idealized or embraced by many of the girls and women, and that actually sometimes makes the lives of the so-called non-typical men and boys really difficult, because the level of, so with all this reality, I would say that one of the big step from our side would be, as the service provider, be it social legal or be it counselors or be it other NGO workers, as their access is extremely limited, and even if there is access, that is a one-way access. Often it is not a two-way access, even if it is online based. So that has to be addressed by by very well-crafted messaging system, where we have to really appreciate and promote, encourage the care and sensitivity building and other warmth building. I mean, the ice breaking, as well as this culture of non-communication breaking type of stories. Actually, stories or pieces can be actually can reach to them. We have to take the responsibility to take these type of pieces, reach to those audience who are potentially, not only potentially, but they are already in troubles of this intimate partner or within family, emotional, sexual, physical, and also multiple violences. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Imtiaz. I think since I said we are already out of time, I'll take like one last question. I don't know, Misha, you can pitch in. If you have to say anything about it. It says that, what do you think about the impact of masculinity on women's use of urban space? Anand, do you want to say something about it? How this impact of masculinity or toxic masculinity? What do you want to say?
I would say the dominant idea of masculinity, along with toxic, because the dominant idea of manhood, if a man is sitting at home, he'll be cursed and said that, why are you sitting like a woman in home? Just go out. So basic idea of men need to be in public spaces restricts women's spaces, because the public spaces are not made safe by these toxic masculinities. So the unsafe spaces outside, because of the toxic notion of masculinity, definitely restricts women's spaces. Not just on the streets. If you get into pubs and if you get into coffee shops, the way possibly the performance of manhood is happening in a very louder voice, and maybe restrict that space for women only to go and have access to those kind of spaces, and just have their own time, just leisure time, or say there is a group in Mumbai which is of women, goes on Mumbai public spaces anywhere, and they just loiter around in chai ka thela, chowpal here and there, and they just try and claim that kind of spaces. So to have urban spaces accessible, they have to actually need to really take up that extra dominant idea of manhood and men need to be in public space automatically restricts women's spaces, not just in urban, also in rural or semi-urban parts. And there are many other facets to this question, which I possibly might not cover at the moment.
Okay.
I would like to mention when it comes to urban spaces, especially the public transport, because there was another study we were doing, so where masculinity can be like a very serious issue for female travelers. So so I don't understand the question clearly, but what I can say that definitely we can see that there's some like the wrong idea of masculinity can have some impact for the women's daily life in the urban space, be it as Anand mentioned, in the coffee shop, restaurants, and streets, but also in the public transport. So it just adds, as a woman, I also feel like it just adds more stress to urban life for the women, like all these things. But yeah, if we can look into that as well, but thank you. So far that's
yeah.
Misha, I think also that's what, since we are talking about gender-based violence, we're talking about harassment, we're talking about if, public place harassment, workplace harassment, of course, masculinity, hegemonic masculinity, toxic masculinity, that has a very strong impact, I think, for the women sharing the urban space, and I think all the women who's working, who's out there, they can feel that they can share that. I can see a comment that says a World Bank study looking at the urban space in Dhaka reported 80 to 90% of women using public transport report experiencing harassment. So here you go. We have evidence.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Exactly. Yeah, because the idea of this dominant idea of real man is the one who teases, who harasses a woman.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, and that is why to address this public transport harassment, we need to really engage men to understand that that's not the real definition. Okay, I mean, we need to really reject that idea. So there is a deep connection of the whole dominant notions of masculinities and women's access to public spaces in urban regions.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So we have some more questions. We have some comments, but we don't have time. But I really enjoyed the discussion. I think the audience with us, you also enjoyed the discussion as well. Thanks a lot, Anand, Imtiaz, and Misha. Thanks for joining us today. And I hope to do. I was talking during the last webinar last week. Shohini Ghosh was one of the panelists, and she was saying you should do sequels for all these webinars, because at the end the discussion gets so interesting that you do not want to stop it, but you have to. And I feel really sad as a moderator. But thank you all, and thanks for making your time for this discussion. I personally think that this is these kind of topics, gender-based violence is not only about talking about, as I said at the beginning, the security issues, infrastructure, this and that, but these concepts, if that's in the society, the stereotypes, that's if I think I remember Anand and Imtiaz, you both said that this portrayal of masculinity, it's not good for, like, it's problematic for men as well. Like, not all men fits into this structure, and those who don't, they are also being bullied, they are also facing violence and all. So I think I remember having this discussion, Anand, in one of our trainings, that how patriarchy also doesn't serve the men, but we had, like you had difference, like no, patriarchy serves men. But I think this is again the discussion that how men also for their own good should advocate for changes, changes of these concepts of masculinity, of patriarchy. So on that note, I think we can end our discussion here, and hopefully this kind of dialogues will keep going on. And thank you all, and those who, the audience, thank you for asking those questions. And I can see many comments appreciating all three of you. Thank you for joining us. And sorry that we couldn't answer all your questions. And in terms of research, as Misha said, when we are done with the analysis and everything, we will have a dissemination event for that. So thank you all. This is all for today.
That's
Bye.
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.